The universe of League of Legends is home to a world full of magic, conflict and ancient powers. From the earliest peoples to the great empires, its history have been shaped over millennia. Wars have been fought, empires have risen and fallen. In this video we take a look at the most important events that made this world what it is today. This is the history of Runeterra. Runeterra's time calculation follows a Noxian calendar, which emerges with the rise of the Empire. By conquering and uniting many peoples, Noxus set a new timeline for the founding of the Empire. Events are divided into before Noxus and after Noxus. In the beginning. Long before the existence of time, space and reality, the Void existed. An infinite nothingness inhabited by beings without form and consciousness. In the silence of this darkness, reality suddenly arose. This so-called breath of creation brought with it the Celestials, powerful beings who existed in the newly formed celestial realm. One of these beings, Aurelian Soul, filled the endlessly empty universe with stars, one of which would become the sun of Runeterra in the distant future. An unknown time later, powerful beings formed the planet Runeterra and its moons using the world runes. The enormous magical energy of the runes and the two moons created two realms, the world as it exists materially and the spirit realm, a kind of mirror world more strongly manifested through magic. In the spirit realm, the first godlike beings and primordial demons formed, as did the first Yordles. As flora and fauna began to thrive in the material world, the Celestials shaped Runeterra's surface. The first nature spirits were born, and one day the first humans. With the faith of the people, the gods of the north were also born. "9,000 years before Noxus, the first lands. Mortals lived in harmony with nature until a race of titans descended from the heavens and waged war against them. To defend themselves against the attack, the most enlightened among them absorbed the power of the spirit realm and became the Vestaya Shirei, powerful beings with immense magical power and the gift of immortality. After defeating these titans, they chose to live among mortals. Over time, their descendants interbred with mortal humans and lost some of their original power. Thus the Vestaya were born, a diverse group of chimerical beings who carry on the legacy of the Vestaya Shirei to this day. "8,000 years before Noxus, the War of the Three Sisters. After the defeat of the old gods of the north, the sisters Lysandra, Avarosa and Cyrilda united the tribes of the Freljord. But their unity was short-lived. A dispute erupted over the future of their home. Lysandra had allied herself with ancient, otherworldly beings, the Watchers. While she viewed their power as necessary for ruling the Freljord, Avarosa and Cyrilda considered this alliance dangerous. They saw the ominous signs, the darkening skies, the increasingly cold winds, harbingers of the sinister forces their sisters served. Determined not to tie their people's fate to these beings, they gathered their armies and marched on the Frostguard citadel to confront Lysandra. The final decisive battle raged at the bridge of the Howling Abyss. As the warring sisters fought each other, the Watchers began to force their way through the ice into the physical world. Their mere presence spread chaos, and Lysandra realized the terrible consequences of her pact. In a desperate attempt to stop the Watchers, she drained the Yetis of their magic, transforming them into savage beasts. Finally, she sacrificed her own sisters and their armies to perform a powerful ritual. Using her magic, she sealed the Watchers in true ice. Trapped between the void from which they came and the material world they attempted to infiltrate. The memory of this war faded over time, but the legends of the three sisters and the fate of the Watchers live on to this day. 6,000 before Noxus, the westward migration. From the now long-forgotten lands of the Far East, settlers set out from the continent of Camavor and reached the shores of Shurima and Valoran. Their magical abilities far surpassed those of the humans from the First Lands and the Freljord. Over time, these settlers founded significant civilizations. The Isles of Buru, the Blessed Isles, the Nation of Ishtal, the Empire of Shurima, the tribes of Targon, the port city of Oshawazon, and the Empire of Icathia. Each of these cultures developed its own identity, but all carry the magical legacy of this first settlers within them. A legacy that would forever shape the history of Runeterra. (5,000 to 3,400 years before Noxus), the Golden Age of Shurima. In ancient Shurima, the Sun Priests used the Sun Disk, a powerful artifact to perform the ritual of the Ascension. This ceremony elevated noble citizens who had selflessly served the Empire to become the first Ascended. These warriors were immortalized by the magical energies of the Sun Disk and were considered patrons of the Empire, such as the warrior queen of the Ascended Setaka. After a failed ascension and the destruction of the Sun Disk in Rimazet, the Shurimans built a larger one in what is now the capital city of Shurima. Upon this completion, the Oasis of the Dawn appeared within the structure. Its life-giving water spread, bringing new life to the desert region. But over time, the Empire's desire for power grew. Despite the Mage King of Icathia's peaceful calls for coexistence, the Shuriman Empire subjugated them with the Ascended and killed their ruler. At the same time, Shurima would begin abolishing all worship of deities other than the Ascended, marking them as false idols. (2,500 years before Noxus), Icathia's rebellion against Shurima. The Icathian Council submitted numerous petitions to the Shuriman Emperor, hoping that some of their most prominent citizens would be selected for ascension to help shape the Empire. However, each petition was rejected without explanation, increasing hostility towards Shurima. In an attempt to gain diplomatic support, all the requested nations declined out of fear for Shurima and his Ascended. In response to this rebellion, a group of Shuriman Ascended led massive armies against Icathia. In a desperate attempt to use the Void against their enemies, the Council of Icathia opened a massive Void Rift, allowing countless Void beings to enter the physical world. This resulted in the immediate destruction of their capital, and the land became so corrupted that it was unrecognizable in its original form. A massive battle ensued between the Void beings and the Ascended, with many of them experiencing unimaginable horrors. Some of them even fell in battle, including Setaka, and Shurima was forced to abandon Icathia for good. (2,000 years before Noxus), Azir's failed ascension. The current Emperor Azir believed that the world would benefit from Shurima's culture and way of life. Therath, an imperial mage and close friend of Azir, suggested he perform the ritual of ascension. Despite ancient warnings against the ascension, which hadn't been performed for centuries, the young ruler agreed. When the ascension ceremony began, discord and squabble arose within Therath, who then pushed Azir from the platform to receive the ascension himself. The powerful magic destroyed his human body and the Sun Disk. Without its emperor and with its capital destroyed, the empire crumbled to dust. (2,000 to 550 years before Noxus), the War of the Darkin. The Ascended ruled Runeterra for centuries in a fragile alliance. Without an emperor to lead them, many of the surviving god warriors worked towards selfish ambitions and began to fight among themselves. They considered themselves the rightful heirs of the world, subjugating mortals and forcing them into worship. Plagued by the horrors they witnessed at the Battle of Icathia, they fall into madness. They harness their immortal lives and learn forbidden forms of primal magic, shaping blood, flesh and armor until they became completely unrecognizable, leaving nothing to remind them of the honorable warriors they once were. The mortal communities called these tyrants Darkin, an ancient Shuriman curse translating to the Fallen. One of the Darkin, Sholani, who was the first to learn the forbidden blood magic, began using it to subjugate other Darkin, thus ending the senseless fighting among her brothers and sisters. But the strongest of the Darkin were not so easily controlled and felt betrayed. The initial fighting escalated into a war. At the climax of the conflict, the Targonians and their aspect hosts finally intervened, defeated the remaining Darkin and sealed them in their own weapons. 400 before Noxus, the reign of the Iron Revenant. Disappointed with the afterlife, Sanuzar refused to fade away, calling out through the veil between the material and the spirit realm, promising his unwavering strength to those who would answer. A group of sorcerers attempted to resurrect him. Without flesh and bone, he bound his ghost form in dark metal plates that mimicked his old armor. The sorcerers who thought to use him as a tool failed to bind him to their magic, were erased by him, and he was reborn as Mordekaiser. For centuries he waged his crusades, forging an empire and building the immortal bastion at its center. Eventually Mordekaiser was defeated by an alliance of Noxii tribes and a betrayal from within his own ranks. A secret coven severed his soul from his armor and sealed it deep within the bastion. 25 years before Noxus, the Ruination. After what felt like an endless search, messengers from the kingdom of Camavor discovered the Blessed Isles, a place where it was potentially possible to revive the king's deceased wife. Consumed by grief and longing, the king Viego immediately set sail with his fleet. Arriving at the islands, the decomposing body of his wife in his arms, the scholars warned him that they could not help him. As the king was about to return home, a mysterious man approached him. He led him to an underground well deep beneath the halls of Helya, the capital of the Isles. The ritual meant to revive the queen was only partially successful, causing her to return as a spirit. In pain, rage and confusion, she took Viego's magical sword and drove it into his heart. Together they sank into the water, where the magic of the sword and the well collided. This trapped Viego in an endless cycle of destruction and resurrection. Black mist poured from his wound, and the waters turned dark. A massive wave of magical energy and black mist shook the islands, destroying everything in its path. As the mist receded, it enveloped harbors and ships, seemingly eerily undoing the damage it had caused. The Blessed Isles were trapped in a state between destruction and restoration, death and rebirth, and became the Shadow Isles. "13 years before Noxus, the Rune Wars. After Helya fell to the Ruination, the remnants of an ancient order from the Blessed Isles fought to keep the knowledge of the world runes secret. Distrust and political tension grew as nations feared being destroyed by these powerful relics. Ancient magical artifacts and the world runes themselves quickly fell into the wrong hands, and battles of apocalyptic proportions erupted, causing permanent damage to the land itself. Day 0. The founding of Noxus. The Rune Wars devastated the known world. After a decade of apocalyptic battles, the last Noxii retreated to the Immortal Bastion to escape the magical chaos. When they finally emerged, the land was devastated, but they had survived. United as one people, they called themselves Noxus and marked their calendar from that point on. 292 years after Noxus. The Demacian Crown. In the far west, a young nation crowned its first king. Originally settled by refugees from the Rune Wars, Demacia declared itself a permanent refuge from magic. "349 years after Noxus. The Noxian Empire. The noble houses of Noxus swore to unite all the nations of Runeterra under a single banner and their principles. Thus the Noxian Empire was founded, led by its first Grand General, who would lead the war host to victory. 772 years after Noxus, the tragedy at the River Pilt. Trading clans that controlled the routes between the continents of Valoran and Shurima accelerated the construction of massive passageways and transport routes. However, the operation for these sun gates destabilized the ancient port of Oshawazon, causing large parts of the city to collapse into the dark caverns below and unleashing toxic gases polluting the area. "787 years after Noxus, Bilgewater. With the arrival of ever-increasing numbers of adventurers and fortune hunters, Buru missionaries offered the so-called Pelangi refuge in the southern base of the Serpent Isles. Despite years of cultural misunderstandings, the settlement eventually developed into a thriving port city. "790 years after Noxus, Piltover. Over nearly 2 decades, the partially destroyed city of Oshawazon underwent extensive rebuilding. The construction of the Sun Gate significantly transformed eastern Valoran and the surrounding seas. The newly gained maritime control brought enormous wealth to the city and supported the development of a new district over the Pilt. "892 to 945 years after Noxus, the war between Noxus and Demacia. This war marked the beginning of the decline of Noxus' conquest. For the first time, the Noxians encountered serious resistance. The battle-hardened kingdom of Demacia proved a worthy opponent. Over half a century, Demacia freed the lands of central Valoran from Noxus' rule and drove his armies back towards the Immortal Bastion. "974 years after Noxus, the invasion of Ionia. After years of preparation, Grand General Borim Darkwill ordered Noxus' large-scale occupation of Ionia. Initially, the warhordes met little resistance, but their brutal actions in the provinces soon led to fierce retaliations from various Ionian militias, which had become more organized after the infamous Battle of the Placidium. "989 after Noxus, the rebirth of the Sun Disk. When the bandit Sivir was betrayed and stabbed by her Noxian client in the ruins of the Shuriman capital, her blood soaked the sand, and due to her unknown relationship to Azir, awakens an ancient magic. The former ruler revives, finds Sivir, and brings her to the ruins of the Oasis of the Dawn to save her. With this act of kindness, he fulfilled the final step of his ascension after 3,000 years. With his newfound power, he raises the Sun Disk from the dunes of Shurima and reawakens the Oasis and its life-bringing waters. "983 to 991 after Noxus, the era of Hextech. This was a time of scientific progress in Piltover and Zorn, marked by the discovery and the rapid development of Hextech. This revolutionary invention, a blend of magic and machine, led to an academic renaissance and contributed to Piltover's development into a global trading center. At the same time, however, it intensified existing political tension between the two sister cities and led to the creation of weapons and a conflict that could have destroyed the entire city. "994 to 997 years after Noxus, the return of the ruined king. After nearly a millennium of preparation, the spirit of the warden who once led Camor's king to the sacred waters beneath Helya resurrects Viego. When 2 members of the Order of Sentinel, who sworn to fight against the Black Mist, learned of this, they set out to stop Viego in his destructive rampage. After freeing innocents corrupted by the king's magic and recruiting more sentinels, they confront Viego in direct combat on the Shadow Isles. Using a magical Shuriman artifact, they succeeded in stopping and sealing Viego. "996 years after Noxus, the Great Mage Rebellion. This rebellion refers to the recent uprising between the government of Demacia and the mages living within its borders. These mages rebel against the centuries-old anti-magic principles established in Demacia, which were characterized by oppression and persecution. As you may have noticed, the last few dates overlapped somewhat, which is due to the fact that we've now arrived in the present days. Runeterra's history has always been marked by conflict and strife, and many of these are still ongoing. Additionally, otherworldly forces lurk hidden or sealed away, posing a constant threat to this world. Which time period do you find most interesting? Let me know in the comments, and please leave a like if you enjoyed the video. On my channel you'll find more videos about the oldest stories in League of Legends. If you don't want to miss anything, hit subscribe and ring the bell. Thank you for your attention and interest in the world of League of Legends, and maybe I'll see you in the next video.